We've already brought you the greatest knockouts, the greatest overall finishes, and even the greatest fighters of all time. And if you haven't watched any of those videos, you can find the links in the description below. But for today's list, we're going for the grappling exchanges and the submissions that eventually came and left their mark on the fight game. The criteria here is a mix of technique, the stakes involved, historical significance, the level of opponent, and a big old splash of personal preference. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time, let's just get into it. The honourable mention, Royce Gracie versus Gerard Gordeau. Like our top 20 GOAT list, I'd rather not spend too much time going over the various entries that didn't quite make the cut. You could probably make your own assumptions about who came 21st and 22nd and so on, but even still I had to give Royce Gracie his place. Indeed, he wasn't submitting fellow BJJ practitioners, but without his work early on, every single other submission featured on this list wouldn't have had the platform to happen on. So yeah, UFC 1, Gerard Gordeau, the tournament winning rear naked choke that inspired a generation. Okay, let's move on. Number 20, Charles Oliveira versus Eric Wisely. To kick things off, we go to one of the most painful looking applications of the calf slicer that I've ever seen in MMA. And what better way to get the ball rolling than to check in with the man who has the most submissions in the promotion's history, Charles Oliveira. The setup on this one was just so pretty, as Oliveira latched onto Wisely's leg, catching him in a no-win situation that, while I'm no expert, looked like it was causing his opponent some major agony. A beautiful sub by Do Bronx and one of his finest in my opinion. Number 19, Alexi Olynyk versus Victor Pesta. I love this submission on so many levels. If you weren't overly familiar with Alexi Olynyk and, you know, what he does, then you would have thought that he was probably in some danger after Victor Pesta managed to mount him here. But what so many don't and didn't realize, including the commentators at the time, was that it was all part of the plan. His patented Ezekiel choke was already being locked in, and before anyone knew what had happened, Pesta was tapping and Olynyk had his 13th career Ezekiel choke. Number 18, Frank Mir versus Tim Sylvia. Frank Mir makes his first appearance on this list, hint hint, with this brutal arm-snapping submission of Tim Sylvia. And it wasn't just that he managed to break Sylvia's arm with this armbar, or that he used this submission to capture the vacant heavyweight title in the process. No, of course all of those things factor in, but this all happened in 50 seconds, a major signifier of just how good this prime version of Frank Mir was. Unfortunately, that infamous bike accident would see him stripped of his belt, and because of his recovery he would lose over a year and a half of vital career time. But either way, Frank Mir was and is an undeniable legend. Number 17, Nate Diaz versus Kurt Pellegrino. Look, this is a personal favorite and it's all about attitude, and I have no problem stating as much. This one was just pure show business. Nate Diaz, while he was on his come up, managed to take out the black belt Kurt Pellegrino in some serious style, securing a triangle choke to force the tap. But the real reason this one is here is because of Nate really showing off his character. He celebrated like he had already won mid-submission, knowing how tight his own squeeze was, and if that wasn't enough, he won the hearts of the masses by flipping the bird to the cameras, making this an iconic moment that was simply too fun to omit. Tied at number 16, Aljamain Sterling versus Cody Stamann, and Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Brandon Davis. I really couldn't split these two outstanding submissions with a clear conscience, which I know is cheating. But also, how often do you see a rare submission like the Suluev stretch pulled off in MMA competition? Well, the answer is not often at all. So when Aljamain Sterling managed to lock one in on Cody Stamann, he knew that he had achieved something very special, a feat that might not be replicated for quite some time, or at least that was the plan. Unfortunately for him, Zabit Magomedsharipov was sitting backstage at that very same event and decided that he too would like a slice of that pie. So what did he do? Well, he went out there a couple of hours later and gave the fans yet another Suluev stretch. Insane stuff. And yes, Zabit probably deserves to be edged ahead because of the fact that he went out there intending to copy this very rare submission, but even still, I have no problem tying them for 16th place. Number 15, Brian Ortega versus Cub Swanson. When Brian Ortega manages to submit someone, there's usually major style points on display, and when he took on Cub Swanson in a real breakout performance, the way he jumped onto this guillotine while standing only to readjust midair for the tap, yeah, it was very clear at this time that he had a next level ability to snatch a neck. And sure, while there are better overall BJJ fighters in this game, few others bring that type of danger level to the cage like T-City does. Number 14, Paul Craig versus Magomed Ankalaev. This next one might not make everyone's list, but it sure as as hell made mine. Paul Craig had absolutely no right to submit Magomed Ankalaev the way the fight was playing out. See, on my list, the circumstances and even the record books play a pretty significant part in my decisions. And as the Dagestan fighter edged closer to what would be a clear win, the Bear Jew managed to snatch victory from the jaws of certain defeat, locking in a triangle for the tap with just 1 second remaining on the clock. Submissions don't ever come around as dramatic or as well timed as this one. A true 1 in a million moment. Number 13. Demi and Maia versus Chael Sonnen. Demi and Maia might just be the single greatest BJJ to MMA transitioner we've ever witnessed inside the cage. And in there with Chael Sonnen, he pulled off probably his masterpiece. Everything about this submission was amazing. The sequence, involving an initial trip to get Chael to the mat, the way he landed in the perfect position to immediately find the triangle, how he then rolled into it after getting his limb underneath Sonnen's chin. It was just a seamless veteran move and a display of masterful grappling at the highest level. Number 12. Yuri Prohaska versus Glover Teixeira. Look, this finish wasn't about the technique. Hell, it wasn't even about the fact that Glover Teixeira was among the most proven grapplers in 205-pound history, and Yuri Prohaska simply wasn't. No, this was an incredible fight of attrition from start to finish, and that whole sequence in the 5th round that saw Prohaska look defeat straight in the face from bottom position, with the clock against him, only to reverse it and eventually score the tap. Yeah, Glover was tired, but it was a finish that defied all logic, and one of the great title-capturing wins of our time. Number 11. Miesha Tate versus Holly Holm. Not only was this submission by Miesha Tate one of the all-time great title fight comebacks, but the actual execution here, how she willed this position into existence after failing so many times before. It's almost as if Miesha fought above herself for this one finishing sequence, knowing that it was now or never, pulling the great Rousey conqueror to the mat like her life depended on it, before choking her unconscious to win UFC gold. A stunning turn of events. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all of our weekly uploads. We're also going to be pushing out exclusive content through our Patreon and YouTube membership program, so if you want to avail of that, check out the links in the description below. Number 10. BJ Penn versus Matt Hughes 1. This was one of the finest upset performances you'll ever see. BJ Penn, up until this point, had been showing his clear potential, but in there with the great champion Matt Hughes, he was expected to fall. However, after finding himself on top against the powerful wrestler, the prodigy worked his way to the back to find the rear naked choke and eventually pull off this massively surprising victory. Little did we know at the time, but we were watching an all-time great of this sport truly coming of age, a division above his natural weight class. Number 9. Georges St-Pierre versus Michael Bisping. Georges St-Pierre answered a lot of critics when he came back after his lengthy layoff, debuting as a middleweight against Michael Bisping for the divisional strap in a very, very entertaining contest. What I love about this one is how GSP gave the count just enough room to make him think that he had an out, an escape route from the horrendous ground and pound he'd been taking, only to hop over his head and take the back for this legendary rear naked choke finish that put Bisping out. Just magical stuff from Georges St-Pierre. Number 8. Ronda Rousey versus Kat Zingano. Again, this one's all about the record books and how unlikely a scenario this was. Ronda Rousey was one hell of a submission expert, and to score a finish by submission in just 14 seconds is a truly ridiculous feat. Factor in that she was opposite a fighter of Kat Zingano's experience and talent, and yeah, this rapid submission was just a thing of beauty. Rousey's legacy is understandably in tatters, but this is one of the greatest title defending finishes of all time. Number 7. Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor. This one was all about the occasion, all about the opponent, and the fact that Nate Diaz finally earned the recognition he deserved off of this immense performance. Conor McGregor was, of course, the one with all of the hype coming in, and in that first round he fought his kind of fight. But Diaz did not go down like all of his featherweight opponents in the past, and when he found his moment, boy did he take it. After stunning the 145-pound king on the feet, Nate managed to counter his desperate takedown attempt and eventually locked in this legendary rear naked choke, a blockbuster victory from Stockton's finest. Number 6. Matt Hughes versus Frank Trigg 2. It's Dana White's all-time favorite fight, and for me, it's probably in the top 5. Frank Trigg was such a good villain to Matt Hughes' hero, and when he hit the champion low with a groin shot and proceeded to take advantage, it only served to make what happened next even greater. Hughes was hurt, and Trigg almost had the submission. Unfortunately for him, the champion had just enough space from the choke to escape, get on top and literally pick his opponent up, run across the cage and slam him down to the canvas before unleashing all hell. And he didn't rush the submission either. You could tell that this was a revenge story. The rear naked choke that followed was merely a formality, but this submission is a sum of all of its parts. A perfect sequence in my eyes. Number 5. Jon Jones versus Lyoto Machida. The context here is important, but even on face value alone, the image of Jon Jones very coldly dropping the great Lyoto Machida's unconscious body to the mat is an image as good as any. But this fight was the first to show us exactly how Jones deals with adversity. He didn't have it all his own way in round 1, but in round 2, his ability to think and adapt on the job saw him eventually hurt, drop and snatch Machida's neck in this nasty standing guillotine. A beautiful piece of work from the 205-pound GOAT. Number 4. Frank Mir versus Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira 2. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira fought Frank Mir like he had a point to prove. After stunning him on the feet, it's almost as if Big Nog decided to say no to a TKO finish because he needed to show himself to be the superior grappler, the best grappler in the heavyweight division. Unfortunately, his guillotine attempt failed him, and Mir managed to somehow sweep and end up on top. Before anyone knew what was happening, Mir was cranking Nogueira's arm with a kimura, and he just cranked and cranked and cranked until it snapped. A legendary moment and maybe my own number 1 favorite of all time. Number 3. Chan Sung Jung versus Leonard Garcia 2. Points for sheer audaciousness go to Chan Sung Jung on this one. After their first fight, fans were definitely expecting something big out of the Korean Zombie and Leonard Garcia for the second fight, but who could have ever imagined that we would see the first twister to be ever pulled off in UFC competition? A stunning piece of grappling by this featherweight legend, and if I recall correctly, there has only been one more twister in the UFC since, courtesy of Bryce Mitchell. A thrilling piece of submission work from Chan Sung Jung, one of the most unique techniques in the game. Number 2. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen 1. On another day, this could honestly be my number 1. It's the hallmark of a truly great champion to do what Anderson Silva managed to do against Chael Sonnen. In spite of all that was going against him, Chael should have won that fight, and Anderson's spirit should have been broken by this stage in the contest. But this is what the truly great ones can do, and this triangle choke is easily one of the greatest finishes in MMA, period. Number 1. Demetrius Johnson versus Ray Borg. And finally we come to the number 1 pick. Another submission in the 5th round, but in my opinion one of the most insane feats of creativity in combat sports history. Look, Mighty Mouse was going to win this fight anyway, and your mileage may vary on how much the stakes actually matter here, but he literally picked up a very good fighter in Ray Borg, suplexed him over his head, and latched onto his arm for the fight-ending submission before he'd even touched the floor. This was a ridiculous thing to attempt, never mind pull off, at the highest level. It just ticks too many boxes for me. Probably the most creative finish we've ever seen. Anyway, that'll just about do it for this video. I have no doubt that there's a lot of disagreements, so by all means let me know in the comments section below, and tell me what your own personal favorite UFC or even MMA submission of all time is. If you do want to help in supporting the channel, liking the video and subscribing would do wonders. And as always, thank you for watching.